Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. I'm really excited about this opportunity to present this work that I've been partnering with Education NC and the North Carolina Center for Public Policy Research for about the better part of a year. What you're going to be seeing is I'm queuing up data from a report called Erasing Inequities, the State of Racial Equity in North Carolina Public Schools. And so just before we begin with this walk, I wanted to take a moment to prime you off on what you're about to witness and help you to be able to interpret some of the findings. First thing I want you to know is that race is absolutely at the center of everything that you're going to be viewing. I often want to address the question right away, why is it all about race? But I think it almost goes without saying that racial disparities in education in American public schools are nothing new. They've been around for a while, and though they are no laughing matter, they've been quite consistent. We know that there's been federal legislation to draw attention to these things, but many times, not only has there not been gap closure, but they have actually widened. North Carolina has a particularly unique history in dealing with race and education, and I should pause here by saying that once, this is an advanced look at the data, once this report is released, an additional report will be released that is a historical narrative that we've also been working on called Deep Rooted, A Brief History of Race and Education in North Carolina that narrates the history of race and education since 1865 to the present. We did that because in order to address the question, we need folks to understand that race and education are married and they are not so easily divorced. And so we talk about race because it's relevant both historically and in the present. And Erasing Inequities uses statistical models to isolate the influence of race and ethnicity on educational access and opportunity. And we feel like this is what is unique. You will notice that the word erasing puts race at the center because we are literally centering our analysis on race and how it shows up. The question we're asking is, how is the experience of these two children different along lines of race? You heard from Dr. Sharon Contreras, who was kind enough to come on my education podcast on the margins. And during that interview, she talked about being a young 9-year-old girl in New York in 3rd grade and knowing at that moment in time that she belonged in the gifted and advanced classes. And that even in her young mind, she knew the reason she wasn't there was because of race. She had to advocate for herself at 9 years old in order to get into those classes. Now, she's currently the superintendent of Guilford County Public Schools, but before that, she was a 9-year-old girl in somebody's school system. So I want you to hang that in your mind as we go forward. So what do we want to know? What we want to know essentially is which racial and ethnic groups are presently most disadvantaged and advantaged in our education system. Specifically, in what ways does race matter? We know it matters, but how? So some of what you'll be seeing is stuff that can be seen with the naked eye. It's just basic graphs where we break the groups out, disaggregated by racial and ethnic subgroups, and you can see sort of the gaping chasm between the attainment levels, if you will, or dropout levels. And so that's pretty descriptive. But the question that we're using statistical modeling for, which we think is unique, is we're asking how significant is race and ethnicity? How much and why does it matter? And we're using predictive models, right? First, for example, we look at race by itself, okay? And we look at the way that race shows up. When we're squarely looking at race, what influence does it have over the outcomes? But we know the argument can be made that what we're looking at may not just be race. Maybe it's socioeconomic, maybe it's gender. So we built another statistical model that takes several other factors into account and controls for them. So that to the best of our ability, we can see, what is the strength of race as a predictor when we control for gender, for limited English proficiency, for ability status, for free and reduced lunch status, and giftedness. And this gives us, in our mind, the strongest correlation of race and the outcomes that we're looking at. Also, it's part of a system. This is not about individuals. This is the system as it looks right now in North Carolina. Our data looks at 1.5 million students. It's from the year 2016-17. And you can see the demographic makeup of our schools. It goes without saying, the slight majority of our kids are actually students of color. And so we're gonna have to respond to this if we want to create a better future for our state. We know that 51% are males, 6% English proficient, 13% receive special needs and services, and over half of our students are around economically disadvantaged or receive free and reduced lunch, and only 11% are identified as gifted. Please keep these proportions in mind as you gander about and look at some of the data pieces. When I talk about the system, what I mean by that is that When we talk about race and racism specifically, I'm not talking about the behavior of individual actors. You've said that, you've heard that before. It's not about people being mean to one another, but rather part of a system that reproduces on its own because of inertia, right? And as a result, we see a very predictable racial hierarchy in the data. It shows up over and over again. And oftentimes, despite the best efforts of those who are working on these issues. And so what we want to look at is, I want you to entertain what is the machinery, what are the cogs, the wheels, the gears that are holding this system in place. Systems deal with the conditions that hold the current reality in place. So I want us to put our systemic lens on when we look at some of these data. We're also looking at equity of access and opportunity. We were super specific in not just wanting to present you a parade of failures and saying, look at how poorly kids are performing, because we feel that that's dangerous. And just looking at outcomes, it is decontextualized because it makes it seem as if there are merely gaps in achievement. When the truth of the matter is, if we present in that way, it can reinforce very negative stereotypes about certain groups. So we wanted to contextualize and look through the lens of access. It's not just that kids aren't performing at a certain level, they're not being given the opportunity or given the access to do so. In short, we talk about education equity in this way. We define it as the education policies, practices, and programs necessary to eliminate barriers and ensure every student gets what they need. Think about it as shoes that fit their feet, right? If I offer everybody here a free pair of shoes, you'll be excited and you'll think for a second and say, hold on, what size? You might even critique what style. Some of y'all don't like Chuck Taylors. Some of y'all like Jordans or Louboutins or something, right? So it's about being specific to the needs of the kids. Lastly, it's about hope for lasting change. I want you to take a look at this picture and think about what it represents. And if you'll indulge me just for a moment, I know I got a timekeeper. I want to read an excerpt from Maya Angelou's Cage Bird. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream until the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The cage bird sings with fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the cage bird sings of freedom. Ultimately, what this is about allowing our students to spread their wings. So helping us to rethink about what do education spaces look like that are fixated and preoccupied with liberation, right? Emancipatory practices that really free our kids from the systems that bind them and allow them to fly. We know data alone won't do this, okay? Even though we're pretty proud of the analysis we've done. But our hope is that North Carolina Public Schools will develop racial equity as an explicit goal. And we define that as this. We believe racial equity is achieved when educational outcomes are not predicted by the race and ethnicity of students. Educational conditions are not predicted by the racial and ethnic composition of the place. The root causes of racial inequities are purposefully examined, and racial and ethnically diverse perspectives are fully embedded within and valued across the power structures, policymaking process, and the cultural fabric of institutions. To that end, I'm announcing the formation of CREED, the Center for Racial Equity in Education. CREED will accomplish this goal through research such as those that you'll see today, also through coalition building, and to providing technical assistance to close opportunity gaps for students, all students in the P20 system, but especially students of color, so that race is no longer the primary predictor of their outcomes. So if that sounds attractive to you, and you're within community, please consider standing in solidarity with us. And if you are in philanthropy, please consider investing in us. So before you get ready to take a gander at these data, I want you to carry a couple of questions in mind as you go about it. You're going to be looking at about 20 data points from the report, not the report in its entirety. They're organized into 8 stations. You won't be able to miss them throughout the building. While you're reviewing, I want you to use your paper to respond to the following question prompts. Please use your notebook that you have that's inside of your bag, and I actually want you to respond to some of these questions as you're going about, recording your responses. I want you to ask yourself, what are your general reactions to the data? Just be honest, right? You know, we would call this a free write in the classroom. What questions do these data raise for you? Then ask, what's the story behind the data? Brené Brown says that stories are data with a soul. And as I just explained to you, some of these are data points, but bear in mind, these are not just numbers, these are actual kids, just like Dr. Contreras. So how does this connect to your personal experience? What further information would be helpful? And lastly, and this is, I can't stress it enough, the focus, which is what solutions can you think of to address the issues raised by the data?